This is the Messiah Hour with Ari Louis.
All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to ask us any questions throughout the program or after the program, you can do so at messiahhour@gmail.com. And if you'd like to make a financial contribution to the program or to the station, you can do so at IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. Again, the PayPal is different than the station name, so I'll repeat it again, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. We've got a lot to talk about and a lot of interesting things going on in the world, a lot of confusion. And on the line right now to help us understand some of the things which are appropriate in the world and some of the things which are not, from solmazal.com, a website that can tell you things about your Hebrew name, and gear.com, which features the new book, The World of the Ger. The co-author of that book on the line right now, Rabbi David Katz. Rabbi Katz, how you doing?
Greetings and salutations, Ari Louis.
Yes, greetings and salutations indeed. You know, I got to say, that line you just said and some of the things you talk about, no offense, but I think you sound a little vulgar or vile. What do you think? Is that true?
The aspirations of the context of the individual is rather proponent to the ratio and proportion to the ratios of men and mankind and in context of how we speak nicely.
I don't know what that means, but, you know, a lot of your critics, because people email me a lot of hate mail stuff because I have you on, you're my favorite rabbi, and we have you on every week, and people email me saying that your Ger stuff is vulgar, and they ask me not to have you on. How do you respond to your critics?
So the little kind of, I guess, I don't know what you call it, I did. It was a crude, off-the-hip attempt to be a hybrid of not vulgar, and I ended it with vulgar, right? You've probably seen The Matrix a million times, like everybody else, right?
I've only actually seen The Matrix, but I fell asleep through the first part. I watched it because my mom kept encouraging me to watch it. And I, keep it aim. I did that, but I just wasn't in the movie. But yes, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, though.
Right. So I think the Matrix goers out there have their favorite scenes. I have a lot of favorite scenes, but I think with my profession as a rabbi, I'm in love with the architect. And that's because the architect is the essence of a non-vulgar individual, right? I mean, you have to have a Webster's dictionary to understand what he's saying. Words like ergo, and by the way, what's the comedian? Will Ferrell does the best impression of the architect, just for your information, to give a kind of a flip side of what I'm talking about.
All right, everyone YouTube that, but after the show, please.
Right. It's fantastic because Will Ferrell is the most vulgar, and the architect is not vulgar. So it's the essence of the example. Here we go. This is the whole thing. Vulgar is when you remove the wisdom and accuracy of non-vulgar language, right? If I say the word, if you ask me a question, I say, Ari, to which context would you be referring? Right? Would you say that sounds vulgar or not vulgar?
That sounds fine to me.
So that means it's not vulgar.
Yeah, not vulgar.
Right. So if you ask me a question and I said, what do you mean? That's vulgar.
Right. You're not happy with what I asked.
It's a kind of just a blah, right? And so the issue going on in the world, and this has been going on since the Garden of Eden, right? And people that know my stuff, they accuse me, like you said, I don't speak vulgar when I teach. The Torah is not a vulgar text. It doesn't want you teaching it in vulgar terms. It wants to maintain a standard of excellence. Well, if you pay attention to what I'm saying now, this is not vulgar, right? You probably have to think about what I'm saying right now to keep up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so.
Right. And so to not do that is to remove the wisdom, kind of give a schmear and just talk about stuff and say the Torah is smart, Ari. It says good stuff. The Torah is pretty high, and it's old wisdom, or not even wisdom. It's old smart things. Right? That's vulgar. And so we have to make a distinction all the time in the Torah between things like holy and mundane. I mean, that's already not a vulgar thing. Do you really know what holy is? Right? And then when you start bringing in the word in Hebrew, kedusha, right? We say, oh, it got to be kadosh, but what is it? What is kedusha? What is holiness? Who knows? And most people that use the word holiness, then you'll get a vulgar response. Holiness is when you have your bekisha and a streimel, and the schmaltz of the herring is dripping on your jacket, and you dafka don't go to the cleaners on Monday.
Right. But
you save the schmaltz for next week. That's what it is to be holy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't agree with that personally. I hope no one's offended. I don't think that is. But
so that may be actually holy to somebody, right? But that is not the definition of holy. When God said, "I rested on the seventh day, and you will sanctify it and make it holy," it doesn't mean keep the schmaltz going for another week, right? So holy actually, it means to be separate, right? To be separate from. God is not you. He is not me. He's not here. Right? I am not in God's world. I am in the lowest world of a klippa called Asiya. We are in an evil world. But then the Kabbalah teaches that God is here. He's in us. He's with us. Blah 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 blah. And you say, well, okay, so how do we resolve this? The Kabbalah teaches there's a unique oneness of God, but then we don't know what that means, so we'll make it vulgar. God is just one, Ari. He's mamish one, right? He's just one. He's everywhere. Yeah, God's everywhere. That's vulgar. You're not saying anything. God is everywhere. Duh. We know that. So the Kabbalah wisdom is going to say, explain to me, please, how God is everywhere. And then we'll say, God is in the Tzimtzum, and he did Tzimtzum Kipshuto, and he's in the Tzimtzum, yet he is one, and it's not as a contradiction, right? And then you use the non-vulgar terminology to explain where and what and how is God in relation to mankind. So I think we've already unearthed in this last 3 minutes a solid example what is vulgar and what isn't. And this is the war of all of time. Do I have permission to be vulgar? Do I have a necessity or an obligation, a responsibility to not be vulgar? Does God want Messiah to be vulgar? Are we free from the burdens of the Torah, much like the Christians say, to be vulgar? Or does God hold us to the Torah, like the Jews say, and we must remain not vulgar? What do you think about that?
Well, let me ask you this, because you're heavily involved in the world of the Ger. Obviously, the title of your book.
Available at gergear.com for $20.95.
Yes, indeed. And everyone in that world, they know you. I mean, you're the rabbi there. So would Christianity be Ger gone vulgar?
Jesus was the world's first Ger movement gone incredibly wrong, bad, and vulgar. Right? How I get there, that's a different story, a different show, different time. But religion and all these things, the bad parts of religion are vulgar. I'll just give you some examples, right? So Ger in modern day Judaism became vulgar. It's the convert. But back 2,000 years ago, what they did was they brought out Ger, and Ger is like the most refined word in the Torah. It's my opinion. It's not a fact. It just is a very non-vulgar word, and we've made it vulgar. And so back then, they didn't treat it with the sanctity it needed, i.e. in non-vulgar terms. It became vulgar, and that's why it all went bad. So if you ever look into the New Testament, not that I do, I've just seen it, in relationship to my work. People like Rabbi Tovia Singer and Michael Skoback, right, they go in there to refute Christianity. So I've done my part, wherever it's apropos. And what I noticed about the New Testament, when I saw this, I said, man, it was painful to my mind to even see it. It was so bad. I'll give you an example of what it was. Ready? This is my impression of a passage from the New Testament. Right? And maybe I might be vulgar doing this, but this is how I see it. Ready?
Yeah, we have a huge Christian audience, by the way, Rabbi, just so you know. But whatever, obviously we're about telling the truth. And go ahead,
right.
Speak your piece, please.
Right. Right. No, this is actually a proof to the New Testament has valid part to it. Right? It's we're saying the New Testament is a vulgar addition to the Old Testament. Right? Religion is a vulgar response to God's word. Because God is prickly. Right? The Torah bothers people. Kill the 7 nations. Ew, that kind of hurts. Right? Conquer the land of Israel. That kind of hurts. I don't like that. But that's you're being vulgar. Right? God never said open up an AK-47 and take out the crowd. The proper non-vulgar way of conquering the land of Israel is the 7 laws of Noah. A very non-vulgar way. But if you don't know that, you assume it's vulgar. And the God of Israel just likes to kill people. That's a vulgar thing, a vulgar thought. So the New Testament says, that's too vulgar. Let's make it less vulgar. But it never actually was vulgar. So then they came out with a less vulgar response to something vulgar that in truth was never vulgar at all. So here's my impression of the New Testament. You'll see it's not offensive what I'm saying, but actually it's a truism. There was Bob and Bill. They were walking down the street, and Bob said to Bill, or whatever, here we go. Bill, you're pretty great. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, Bill, you're practically like speaking the word of God. Thanks. Yeah, I am. Yeah, the word of God comes through you. Thanks. I know that. Well, you're practically God. Yeah, I know that. You're God. So it takes like an allegorical extreme. Like Ari Louis, you are radio. You are radio.
I love it. Keep saying it. Love to hear it.
Right? So then it's repeated. Did you know Rabbi Katz said that Ari Louis is radio? So imagine when you're dealing with vessels that are high and holy, and we talked about this a while ago, Ari, right? A kind of a fictitious statement. What is Mashiach? Mashiach represents God. Okay, I can handle that. Then it gets vulgar. Wait, hey, what did he say? Oh, Mashiach is God. What? No, I mean, he represents God. He's got God. Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, Mashiach's God. I get it. Okay, he represents God. But the next guy that hears that, he's going right to the whole thing. Mashiach is God. Wow. So a man really is God? I don't know. That's what they said. Once you do that, that's where the Avodah Zorah comes. It never actually was idolatry. Right? It's taking extremely high concepts. And mankind's mind naturally doesn't grasp things like Ari Louis is radio. So because of that, we guess and we make it vulgar. Right? I don't know what it means when some mystical piece says that Mashiach, blah, 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 which blah, blah, blah has God in mind, and it just says is God. Right? We zone out. And, what did it say? I don't know. I was reading this book, and it said about Mashiach and something, this and that is God. Like, what? So it becomes vulgar. And then you discuss it, and in the context of your friendship or your arena that you're in, hey, you understand me, I understand you. We have the liberty to be vulgar and say, hey, you know what I mean, right? And he says, yeah, I know what you mean. Right? What we're really saying is, hey, I'm not really an idolater, right? And you say, yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not going to go out and say you're an idolater. Oh, okay, thanks, cool. But then, if I'm the rabbi and you're the student, and you say, hey, someone says, hey, what did Rabbi Katz say? And you say, something about Mashiach is God? Like, Rabbi Katz said that? I says, yeah, something. I don't know. Now that person says, okay, he said something else, so it's not quite. Then he goes and tells someone, yeah, Rabbi Katz says something like this. And so back then, the Ger movement was so ripe and so new and this and that. The vulgarity just went viral, right? It was a total meltdown of protocol. You could basically say what you wanted, and it was all predicated on you know what I mean, right? The New Testament is predicated on you know what I mean, right? Jesus isn't really God; it's like God, but after thousands of years, even 100 years, it's called the gospel, right? How is a man God? He just is. That's what they proclaimed. Why? Because the vulgarity went in full bloom, and the wisdom always escapes once you're vulgar. The Greek academies of learning were based on wisdom. Today in America, Obama wants to subsidize university diploma for everybody in America. Really? All of a sudden, everybody in America is down on the level of a Greek philosopher? No, they made it vulgar. It no longer represents what it was. The wisdom's gone. So even if they teach some kind of logic or Greek wisdom or philosophy, it is so far removed. It's the McDonald's Big Mac in place of the filet mignon, right? That's what Christianity basically became. It may have had good intentions, as we say. All good. What's that?
All good intentions lead to hell, or something like that.
Right. Hell is paved with the path of good intentions.
That's it. That's the
right.
Yeah.
And so Christianity may not have been any different. It was the world's first ger movement. Hey, bravo, kol kavod to you. But it was done vulgar, right? And because of that, every ger that walks the face of this planet Earth today that I've met, and I've met a lot of them, they have one passion. Remember, they're coming out of the church, right? The church is to their back. They're coming to something better, and they're saying, hey, guys, we came out of vulgarity. We're not going back. Right? We're not going back to vulgarity. The ger movement should have worked 2,000 years ago. Should have worked. But it was too vulgar. And now, this time around, ger 2.0, we are not accepting anything more vulgar. And what's the most vulgar term in today's world? Ger. It just means convert. No, it doesn't. It has so many meanings. It's such an enlightened word that when you just dumb it down with vulgarity, it just means that's where we are. Society today. I mean, listen to Obama when he talks with Jimmy Fallon. All of a sudden, Obama's candid and charismatic, and he's funny, and he's eloquent, right? And when he gets onto his press speech, all of a sudden it's folks. What is that? Why are you calling us folks? He doesn't call Jimmy Fallon, all his celebrity stars, folks, because he's making it vulgar. If you open your eyes to society, the internet, the news, celebrities. The Kardashians, vulgar 1.0, right? That the society has always gravitated towards remove the wisdom and give them something vulgar in place. I saw a quote, I don't remember where it comes from. If you want to control mankind, give them beer, chicken wings on a Sunday afternoon and a Bears game, and you will conquer mankind.
Yeah, that would conquer me pretty much. Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on Israel Sports and News Radio. We're talking about vulgarity. With the man who's not vulgar, Rabbi David Katz. And I'm not vulgar either. But we appreciate everyone listening. Let's try to let's expand this topic a little more, because the main character, if you will, of the New Testament is Jesus. So is Jesus something that went vulgar?
First thing I want to say is, vulgar is it can be a vulgar term, right? Everybody out there is probably scratching their head saying, that's not what I was told, because you think I'm saying vile. Right? You all are hearing vile. Vile is not vulgar, right? Vile is crude and crass. If I'm going to diss the New Testament and Christianity, like Ari was suggesting, remember who the listeners are, that would be vile and crass. Cracking jokes at the expense of everybody out there. Vulgar is not that. Vulgar is not offensive. It's not an insult. The plight of man is to be vulgar and to come out of being vulgar. The point is to recognize your vulgarity, our vulgarity, my vulgarity, everyone's vulgarity, and use it as a building block of the prickly nature of God challenging man to rise up from his fallen state of existence in an evil world and come and enter the Garden of Eden. Basically just that, right? So Jesus became a vulgar expression of basically anything and everything, right? If you want to make God vulgar, Jesus is your man, right? Jesus is God right there, vulgar. Now, how do you get there? If you take anything and it's like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, right? It becomes mangled. I'm sure you probably saw the movie Multiplicity, am I right?
Oh yeah, big fan of that movie.
Remember the character that was like the copy of the copy?
Right, and he had a lot of problems.
He was slightly vulgar.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
But which is interesting because Michael Keaton, the star character, if you think about it, was he not the essence of not vulgar? He was a great guy.
Yeah.
Right? He was the builder. He wanted to golf. He was portrayed as a supremely enlightened kind of daily guy, but not vulgar. That was the point. He's saying, I'm not a vulgar guy. How can I live a non-vulgar lifestyle? I'll clone myself. And the next clone was slightly more vulgar. Remember? He was a tough guy.
Right.
The guy that ran the construction company. And then they said, okay, not cool. I'm busy. I'm running the show. So they did another one.
And he was more feminine.
He was the gay guy. So it was like the liberal left, right? A different type of vulgar. He was making dinner and the wife is falling in love with the gay guy because it was a different vulgar. Then they cloned the clone of the clone and he becomes, a deformed human being, right? Incredibly vulgar. So, the movie is a perfect analogy for what we're expressing here. And so basically when you remove the divine nature of Torah, God, divinity, Judaism, you're going to get a vulgar response. If you want to, let's say, the Bible's too hard, we got to make it easy, and people will connect and bring it down. And, Mr. Rogers taught the Bible, right? In fact, Barney taught the Bible. The entire Torah can be summarized as, I love you, you love me, and we are a happy family. That's the entire Torah. That's a vulgar thing. No, it isn't. Right? You just took the wisdom out of the entire thing. And so once you have a Messiah, right? Messiah brings the creation into the temple of God, da-da-da-da-da. Once you say, that's too hard, I don't know what it means, it's all in Hebrew, you're saying it's got to have all these conditions and things. Can't Mashiach just be love? Just Mashiach's love. Yeah, Mashiach's love. Jesus is love. I think he's Mashiach. Right? Once you start making those sacrifices and those not consolidations, I forget the word, but once you start making those kind of lessening the wisdom, right? You're going to remove the wisdom, lose the wisdom, and you're faced to make a decision, right? Compromise? That's the word. Am I willing to make the compromise to my life? That's what everyone has to basically go through in Avodah Zarah. They know in their mind, deep down where they're not vulgar, they want one thing. Yud Kei Vav Kei Hashem Hu Elokim. Everybody, everything in creation knows that. But it's in a place that's not vulgar. And once you're vulgar, and on that point, then you can no longer express or articulate your views of your connection of God. So now that you're compromised, you're going to make compromised decisions, right? I want God, but I can't talk about God. So therefore, I can't pray, let's say. I can't study. In fact, I just want to hang out with people that are like me. I just want to be like people like me and people that are not vulgar in their beliefs, but their expression they're vulgar because God made me that way. So you say, where do I find my crowd? Okay, the non-vulgar people, not my crowd. They look at me like I'm a baboon. I can't go there, right? So now I find the church. These are good people. We believe in God. Okay, they call God Jesus. That's not the end of the world, right? I know the truth. God looks at my heart. God is the true judge. I'll tell people, don't judge me. Only God knows my heart. And then on the outside, I'm saying, praise this one, praise that one. And I say, not really. But that's why the Torah challenges the nations to say, we know you're lying. Meaning, we know your heart is with God. We know you really want the truth. So the Torah says, make people understand they are to become ger. And you say, how dare you tell me what to think and feel? The Torah says, I know better than you. You recognize God because that's the truth. The only problem is over time, all the vehicles of communication have been removed. You don't know what ger is. You don't know what a righteous non-Jew is. So therefore, you have no boundary or way or bridge to enter the kosher world. So there are now Jews and non-Jews. And the Jews have Hashem in their world. And the non-Jews don't have any type of infrastructure to build up to something true. So it's a fallen state of affairs due to vulgarity. And what happens is that became a movement. It became religions of the world. And that's why you can repair the world. Because ultimately, if we can bring the teachings of Mashiach back, restore the ancient wisdom, remove vulgarity, which is the essence of Gog v'Magog, the end of days, you will find that the nations will have a platform to come back as they are prophesied to do in nearly every book of Torah and the prophets. Because ultimately nobody is away from God and a fundamental idolater. It's a state of affairs due to vulgarity, and vulgarity is the Satan. In religious terms, you may call him the Satan, the spiritual decay of wisdom. It's a natural phenomenon due to the state of the sin of Adam. He himself suffered the Satan, the snake in the Garden of Eden, the decay of wisdom, which produced vulgarity. Do not touch the tree. If you do, you will die. No one said that. It was a vulgar expression. See, it was given to us by God to basically provide 6,000 years to come out of vulgarity. And that will become the enlightenment of man, reclaiming the lost ancient wisdom by refusing to remain vulgar.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsandNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. Our guest is Rabbi David Katz. He's co-author of the new hit book, The World of the Ger. Rabbi Katz, I've interviewed Rabbi Ken Spiro a few times, and something he said very fascinating in a lecture was that radical Islam is a perverted form of Judaism. You take a look at the suicide bombings, it's a perverted form of Kiddush Hashem. Not their kashrus, but they pray 5 times a day. We pray 3 times. We pray 5 times in Yom Kippur, etc. I want to know, you take a look at ISIS. Is that some type of vulgarity that it was meant to do something else and it came out in a vulgar way? If you could talk a bit about ISIS and vulgar together.
They're vulgar, right? Now, I deal with Gerim in the East, in the Far East. And what I'm finding is, to not be cliche, I've always been against this in my work, right? Don't say, oh, the non-Jews, they ask such great questions. They must have something. Yeah, duh. They have a soul like everybody else. So what's the surprise that they have light and spark and charm, yet they're somehow subdued? The world has oppressed most of civilization. Most people are raised in vulgar societies. So when you look at the Filipino language, for example, and their words, it's very vulgar. Right? They were oppressed by the Spanish, the Americans, all these things. They were never allowed to break out of vulgarity. Well, look in the Middle East. The Arabs are extremely oppressed. I mean, you think Gaddafi was doing any favors to his guys? Right? Was Saddam Hussein doing any favors to his guys? There's the guys on top. Everybody else remains vulgar. The Catholic Church didn't let you read the Bible. Right? And so therefore, everyone memorizes the Quran, but you're not a scholar of the Quran. 95% of them are not scholars in the Quran. And that means they're remaining, they're keeping them down as vulgar people, uneducated and vulgar. Even if they're professional, right? The keys to Islam is a vulgar endeavor. What that does is once you have a vulgar people, right, by social engineering, this is not a flaw of, let's say, the Arabs or any other culture, right? It's the nature of the elite to dumb down, and everybody has it. Everybody has this vulgar thing going on. That's the Erev Rav's whole thing. Thus, once you have a vulgar people, then you can preach the fundamentalist views to those people. Because remember, if I know God is true, but I cannot articulate that, then I cannot challenge you. By definition, I am subordinate to you and God, right? I cannot challenge. What can I say? I am vulgar. You're not. So now you're going to say, the whatever they say. God says that Muhammad and all these things. You should chop the head off of a guy who mocks the prophet. Whatever it is. Now we're going to take it literal. Because it's being delivered as vulgar, you now have an army to do this for whatever reason, and they have no reason to not take it literal. No reason. They've already made that compromise. Right? If they're not going to take it literal, they're going to have to get up and go find the truth, and they may be killed in that process of doing so. The Jews ended up in Egypt in slavery, mind you, right? People do end up as slaves. That's the meaning of exile, right? The liberal Jew who's sitting in Gashmi as exile in America, he's the same thing. He's vulgar, right? He's lost any connection or association with his Yiddishkeit on a non-vulgar level. Now, to do that, I went through tshuva. Ari, you did too, I think, right? So what's the first thing you have to do? Get up and go move next to a religious synagogue. That's not fun, especially when you're living in a secular society. Now I got to go live with the frummies, and I got to daven on Saturday morning, and I have to turn off the TV Friday night. Not so easy, especially when you have a job that mandates that you work those hours. You have a lifestyle that mandates that you are not Shomer Shabbos. So our lifestyles are conducive to being vulgar. How I vote democratically in America, my views of the Supreme Court probably it dictates upon myself that I must remain vulgar in terms of Judaism, right? Goyim or this and that. It's a vulgar thing. Because what are you going to do? Say Goyim are good for Judaism? Are you prepared to go into Ger and find out and dig out the gems that are not vulgar? No, it's not worth it. So a lot of Hebrew rabbis you see that put down the non-Jew in order to pump up his view of the Jew. And why are they doing it? Because vulgarity is easy. It's a compromise choice that people have made. So it's pretty hard to get out of vulgarity when ISIS says, chop his head off and I'll pay your electric bill. You're not going to argue too fast. So the control of society, the vulgar Jesus, the vulgar Christianity, the vulgar Bible, there's always a vulgar alliance involved and a loss of wisdom and a partnership in crime, so to speak, to keep people vulgar, keep the wisdom hidden, and the people in charge will continue for whatever tickles their fancy. That's how it's been.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on Israel Sports and News Radio. My guest is Rabbi David Katz, co-author of the new book, The World of the Ger. Rabbi Katz, you were talking about hiding. Does God himself hide? And if so, how does he do it?
The Kabbalistic texts use a word called simsum, the constriction of God. I think in a this is really stupid I'm about to say, in a vulgar way of explaining it, as hypocritical as that is, a vulgar expression of that. And what I say is we're expected to be vulgar in face of God, right? And the Kabbalah is meant to be what's called, it is not Seichel Enoshi. It is not the intelligence of man. So we've had generations of revelation of Kabbalah, but if we are to to understand it, right, I can explain it to you in the Kabbalistic terms, right? I can just say, Ari, God is in creations in the Simsum. Next question, please. But what does that do? What does that do? I answered it for me. Everyone out there says, what does Simsum mean? Right? We don't even know Hebrew. So if I'm going to make it vulgar in my own words, but not for the sake of making it vulgar to hide wisdom from everybody, right? This is by Moses. He knew the law where Pinchas killed Zimri and Cosby, but he buried it so that there would be a salvation through Pinchas, so that the wisdom would prevail. And hopefully I'm attempting to do that now, right? I'm not dumbing it down saying, don't look at the text, forget about Simsum, listen to David Katz, I know better. No! I'm saying I am assuming you don't know what Simsum is. I'm assuming you have not learned and read the Arizal. I'm assuming that you're going to understand the words that I can put to you. And those words are, God hides in vulgarity. Right? Where God is hidden, you say, I've never seen God. That's because you're vulgar. And you say, well, I'm not vulgar in everything. I'm very good at a lot of things. And you say, that's true. You are good at a lot of things, but God's not there. God chooses to manifest where you're vulgar. Right? Floyd Mayweather, you were punching where he isn't. Except for he wasn't hugging you. Right?
Yeah, he hugged a little bit in the Pacquiao fight, but that's okay.
So God chooses to hide where it's convenient for God. God says, hey, you're vulgar over there. I'm going to go hide over there. And the irony is God's right next to you, and you have no clue. You have no clue because you're vulgar there. This is the secret of men and women. Now, women have a non-vulgar mind. Men's minds, sorry, but we're a bit vulgar, right? When a woman says, honey, I would really love the Dove soap next time you're at the store. What does he hear? Honey, I love soap. So she calls and says, you're late. You coming home? He says, oh, I'm at the store. It's okay. She says, oh, could you bring me my soap? He says, sure. He comes home with some goofy on sale 3 shekel soap. She says, where's the Dove soap? He says, you didn't say Dove soap. You said soap. Now, look how he got it wrong. First she said my soap. The first time it was Dove soap. And he still says now it's just soap. Every time she used a non-vulgar expression, and he, in his dumb, vulgar mind, just heard soap. I like soap. Well, let me ask you a question. Is there anybody on earth that showers without soap?
Maybe a body shampoo, but okay, yeah, I get your point.
So everybody uses soap. She's trying to say to the guy, you should know that I use soap, but I like a particular soap, and we don't hear it. So she said she's mad at the guy now. Why? Because this guy is like a professional speaker, right? He is an eloquent speaker. She says there's no reason why you can't speak. Why is your mind so vulgar? And so this is like the essence of men and women's arguments. And she says, you know what I mean? He says, I don't know what you mean. I'm not psychic. But really, it's not about psychic. Just don't be vulgar. You'll know what she means. Right? So, can you, she's multitasking, cleaning the house. She says, can you put your socks in the bed? He says, that's kind of funny, in the bed? She meant to say basket. And she says, why did you put the socks on the bed? He says, you said the bed. She says, you know what I meant. I don't know what you meant. I'm not psychic. She says, she doesn't say, but she would say, I meant the basket. Like where they go every other day. And this would be an argument for a week. And he would explain for an hour why he had the right to put his dirty socks in her part of the bed. When if he would just realize that's all vulgar and he's lying. There's no reason to put dirty socks in a clean bed. But just stop being vulgar. And so that's where God hides. And so when we daven and pray, I can guarantee you, Ari, I can tell you where your tefillahs break down every single time. When your tefillah gets vulgar, right? You hit that place in your Shemona Esrei where you break down every time. And then you lie to yourself and say, okay, I'll just get through it. Okay, Yotzi done. The answer is you're not static. You're dynamic. You're learning Torah every day and every week. You are changing your definitions of prayer because you're growing in insight. And you say, hey, you know what? I don't know what that word means anymore. I know it used to mean that, but I heard this rabbi say it means this. I'm confused. When you break through in your prayer and you get the breakthrough, you say, oh, I get it, right? That's when the Baal Shem Tov says when you have that godless, that greatness in prayer, that means the Shefa came down, your prayer was answered, and you were successful. You were man enough to stand there, face your vulgar nature, you broke through it, you found your God soul, and God came to you, you broke through vulgarity, and you came out an enlightened being. Right? That's how we're supposed to be. Also in Torah learning, in prayer, everything. The path of Judaism, men and women, relationships, friendships. Start to look up what people say. You have no idea what I'm saying right now. You know a bit of it, but maybe you wouldn't use the words I'm saying in the same way that I do. So if you listen to this recording, look up some of the words I'm using. And you'll find out, hey, I didn't know it could be used in that way. This is the essence of getting out of vulgarity. That's where the enlightenment and wisdom comes from, and even on a day-to-day living basis. It's everywhere, right? God is everywhere, but we're too vulgar to see God.
Now, you were talking about the situation where a husband argues with his wife or he's confused about what she says. So I want to talk about shalom bias. Where exactly does that come from? How is that related to vulgarity?
Because they're never actually arguing. They've never argued once, right? He never heard a word she said. So she's being not vulgar, and she speaks vulgar because she's basically checking to see if where this guy's holding, right? If she's not vulgar, she expresses it in vulgar. If his mind is not vulgar, he should have no problem going through her vulgarity to see her lack of vulgarity. But what does he do? He barks at her like a dog. And she says, wow, he doesn't see that I'm not vulgar. And so these kind of differences of opinion, miscommunications happen all the time. And so she sees how he's vulgar in his thinking, and then he lies about it and defends his vulgar nature just being more vulgar. It's like he's late coming home, and she calls him and says, "Where are you?" And he says, "I'll be there soon." And when he comes home, she says, "What happened?" And he says, just I was a little late today. Now that's vulgar. Why can't you say what happened? You don't just Pete home happened to be late. There's a reason why you were late. And he's saying, what does she think? She's not challenging you in din. The question is, why were you late? And it's not a challenge per se. Now, what happened was he was late because he took a different route home for the first time in 5 years. He wanted to find out if this way was quicker. He's simply curious. And when he did that, he didn't know there was a speed trap. He got pulled over by a cop. Luckily, the cop let him off. And it was a good thing because they don't have an extra $100 because they're budgeting, and the wife is upset about that. So he got out of it because his friend knew the cop, and the cop recognized him and said, "Have a nice day." And that caused me 5 minutes late. And I don't want to tell you why because it's just going to be an argument. But you know what? When she asked, she would love to hear that story because she did the same thing last week. She was afraid to tell you, and she would love to say, "Man, I got stalked by that cop too. What a coincidence." She just wants to relate to you, share an experience. Tell her how your day was. Let her tell you how her day was. But you were being vulgar, and she sensed you were being vulgar, and then you just kept getting more and more vulgar. And she's saying, "Does this guy not love me? How he doesn't talk to me, he doesn't understand me, he doesn't listen to me, he's blaming me." If you would just tell her what happened, she'll tell you what happened. You'll get along. You'll find out you have a lot in common. Both of you are looking for a shortcut way home, simply because you're curious about how to drive faster home. It's simple, stupid, mundane things, but that's what makes us quirky human beings because we're not vulgar, right? Deep down, it's not a vulgar thing to say, "Hey, I want to find out how the difference of time is to go this way home or that way home," rather than just being an automaton and just doing the same thing every day like a ritual robot. So those are the kind of things that people argue about, and it's actually not an argument at all. It's like they never had a chance to get to the relationship. And that's really what God is in the creation. That's religion again. When we're arguing religion, same thing. We're being vulgar, and if we would just not be vulgar, we would get to the truth in literally a matter of seconds.
Again, this is the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. Of course, the email, MessiahHour@gmail.com. PayPal, if you want to make a donation, is IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. My guest is Rabbi David Katz from GerGear.com, Somazal.com. He's the author of the book, The World of the Ger. Rabbi Katz, we were talking about God and how he shows up. Is there something out there where people try to replace God? Can you tell us a bit about that?
So, wisdom is. There's no getting out of wisdom. Kabbalistic reality is. The matrix of reality is. And so what happens is that for whatever reason, people become vulgar. Whatever reason. If it's Erev Rav control, you're lazy, the plight of man, right? You're put in a body that has pulls and desires, whatever it is, we fall victim to being vulgar. So then all of the truth of God's world, God gave us the Torah. That's kind of like adding insult to injury, because now we are vulgar people empowered with the truth. And then when we have that truth, we don't understand it because we're vulgar. Right? Some more than others, okay? But we're vulgar. And when we're vulgar and we don't understand something high, we basically make it up. Right? This is how rumors start, Lashon Hara, right? Bob is a big weightlifter. And they say, how is that possible? Bob was a puny wimp last year. How's Bob that big? I don't know, probably steroids. What gives you that right to say that? How do you know Bob's on steroids? Right? Because you're saying, look, I can't possibly understand how Bob could do that. I can't do that. How could Bob do that? The answer is Bob works his tuchus off Bob owns a gym. Bob's parents owned a gym. Bob had a condition when he was a kid that made him sick and frail, and he almost died, but he didn't tell you that because Bob doesn't want to bore you with his problems. Finally, he got healed by a miracle drug out of India that he shipped over to America, special delivery. Bob then got healed and healthy, started working out, had a lot of ups and downs. His wife divorced him because he was frail and dying. Now he wants to get his manlyhood back. He feels good about himself. He's on vitamin supplements. He's working hard. And guess what? Now he's big and strong. I guess you couldn't figure that out. Right? So it's easier to make it up, right? He's probably on steroids. So same thing in spirituality, right? It's, there's this high level and where God enters creation. And from that, mankind gets his sustenance. And, you're saying, your ego says, your vulgar ego says, how is it possible that the great me doesn't understand this? I've been studying for 6 months in yeshiva. I definitely should know this. So I'm going to make it up. I'm going to give a class for people. They're going to see my brilliant wisdom, and they're going to say, wow, what does that mean? I'm going to be like, you know what it means? It's like when you're sitting at a bus station and the roof is over your head, like that's God. And when it rains and the rain doesn't get on you, that's the shefa. So when you go out to the bus, that's when you get the shefa. Like, wow, that's deep. This guy made it up. You know what I mean? Made it up. And that's on a good end, right? And the perverse end, it'll become very vulgar. It can be, the Rebbe is the one that gives me my shefa, as in not God. It could be that I give myself shefa. Maybe I am God. Whatever institution you want to plug in there. Right? So now you're going to give levels to creation that are God and not God himself. So, love is God. When you love your fellow man, you get stuff. Now love is God. So we have all kinds of little avenues of idolatry that we can do. And that is vulgar. That's how we basically make God vulgar. The Torah is prickly, and it lends to it by saying God has arms, God has a face, God has a will, God wears tefillin, right? We have all these little things that are analogies, and so the vulgar mind says, hey, if they can make analogies, I can too. And the more vulgar you are, and you add some evil to it or some vile nature to it, and maybe you'll say you want to control or you want money, you want power, right? And the people are suppressed with vulgarity. You can basically say, do this, it's God himself. And then they'll basically serve that entity. That now is God. You just made God out of something. And that's how idolatry comes about. You assign to something under God in creation the ability to get me stuff, which is a very vulgar expression, instead of the Hebrew word shefa, which can be translated as bounty, which is usually expressed as light or wisdom, an analogous sake. But I call it stuff. I want stuff. I'm a good guy. I deserve stuff. So if you want stuff, you find how stuff can get to you in creation. You know people that can get you stuff. Once you start thinking there, then you can give divine attributes to things in creation. Effectively, Jesus gets us stuff. Once you go there, then you're trapped in what the King David definition of idolatry. I believe in God. I'm not vulgar with God, but I can't express it. Therefore, I cannot worship God openly. I'm too vulgar to. So I succumb to a lesser entity to get me stuff. Whether it's worshiping the constellations, getting a paycheck, so much that even when it's corrupt, I still get my paycheck, and I don't challenge the system. I don't want to lose my stuff. That's basically Avodah Zarah 101.
All right, and the Gog and Magog, the final war before Mashiach, does that have anything to do with vulgarity?
This is the whole thing, right? Vulgarity is Gog and Magog. They said that in the end of days, we'll put up a leader like Haman over you. Haman literally means vulgar. Hamoni, Haman, is vulgar. How do we get the wisdom back? Gog and Magog is evil's last attempt to make sure the good guys that never get access to wisdom. How do you get wisdom then? By proclaiming war on vulgarity. The thing about it is, is it's an objective word, right? If I can pinpoint vulgar and I say, Bob, you are vulgar. What I've done is, A, Bob cannot get out of this because he knows he's vulgar. I hit him right between the eyes. I didn't insult him. I said, you're a vile piece of you know what. No, you're vulgar. It's not an attack. Right? You're trying to sell me a Big Mac when I want a filet mignon. That's vulgar. I'm sorry. Once you've done that, now I have a license to be not vulgar. Right? Once I accuse you of vulgar, if you really are, then I have a right and necessity to be not vulgar. The weak nature to me is if I go back to vulgarity, then I'm a hypocrite and you're saying, hey, you're just vulgar too. So now you're trying to control me with your vulgarness. But if I can keep the level and not be vulgar and look things up and challenge the system of vulgarity, and when Obama calls us folks, question him on it, you can get back the wisdom. And that's how King David describes, Avodah Zarah, the idolatry, the 8 days, Magog, 7 laws, conquering the land. It's really, in a weird way, a fight against vulgar. It always was. The Egyptian exile was making Kabbalah vulgar. The Babylonian exile was making Torah and Judaism vulgar. The Persian exile with Haman, literally, Achashverosh, was making our lifestyles vulgar. The Greek exiles made our wisdom vulgar. In Rome, whatever left we had that wasn't vulgar, the church pretty much did a good job of making the world vulgar. And that's what defines Rome. It's not so much Gog Magog and the Jew. It's that Rome, Asa, is vulgar. And so because of that, that's where we break out into our wisdom. Once we fight Rome and fight vulgar, then we have access to the unlimited godly wisdom that was never left. It was simply where the vulgar nature wasn't.
All right, last question before we end the program. When you talk about Mashiach, I want to know how that relates to vulgarity. Does it end vulgarity? Does it continue? Talk a bit about that and what happens after he comes.
So the Torah of Mashiach is what the prophecy says. On that day, God is one, his name is one. Right? It says also, I will convert their tongue to a clear language. Safa brura. That's what we're talking about. All of the arguments in Torah, which is the anti-Torah of Mashiach, is vulgar Torah. And I called a big rabbi this week, and a guy who wrote a book that I use a lot in my teachings of Ger. And I never thought to call him, the author of the book. And I called and said, hey, let's talk about this. Number one, I realized, why did this guy talk to me? Some random guy in Spot calling him. He saw I wasn't vulgar. Right? I spoke the language. Right? If I call Ari Louis, start talking about Floyd and this and fight, right? I'm not vulgar. Right? But if I say, if you and I are watching the fight and I say, wow, he hit him pretty hard, huh? What would you think of me? Like, this guy, has he ever seen a fight before? Duh. Obviously he hit him hard, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm vulgar. Like, this guy doesn't belong here. But if I say, the ratio was much greater in Floyd's fight this time than last time, you say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. So the guy told me, he said the number one problem with Ger is it's a problem with language, safa. Once you say, the Rambam says, no Ger till Jubilee, then everything after that we trip up because we're vulgar, right? It's a vulgar thing to say that, Rambam, because you didn't even say it correctly. You paraphrased it wrong in the wrong context. That's vulgar. Now that's okay. If you're not versed in it, you have a right to be vulgar. But you also have a right to leave the world of vulgar. And so Mashiach really represents the worldwide, maybe first time ever, the success in reclaiming the wisdom by leaving the vulgar world of exile behind. The third temple is the essence of not vulgar. Right? The showbread that lasts all week fresh and never decayed, not vulgar. The scent of the incense, not vulgar. The offerings on the Mizbeach and the altar, right? You're going to say, that's for sure vulgar. It isn't. Right? You know what the offerings represent. That's the world turning from vulgar to not vulgar.
All right, there you have it. Again, this has been an episode of Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. Again, you can email the program, messiahhour@gmail.com, or you can email the station, IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio@gmail.com. And a reminder, if you want to check out one of the rabbi's websites or both, if you want to find out what your name is in Ivrit and Hebrew, you can go to somazal.com. If you want to purchase his new hit book, The World of the Ger,
One second.
Yes.
Just popped in my head.
Yes.
If you want to learn what your name means in non-vulgar terms.
There you go. There you go. Go to somazal.com. And if you want to read about the World of the Ger, the rabbis
in non-vulgar terms.
Then go to gergear.com, which is a non-vulgar site. Both
and
sites
if you
are non-vulgar.
If you want to know sports in the world, Ari will tell you sports in non-vulgar terms.
Non-vulgar terms. And you can find me on Facebook in a non-vulgar way, ARILOUIS. And if you want to make a non-vulgar contribution financially, you can do so through my PayPal account, which is not vulgar, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll have some more non-vulgar programming to come and a couple special Shavuot episodes to come on the horizon. This has been the Messiah Hour on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Rabbi, thank you for being my guest this hour.
My pleasure, my non-vulgar friend.
Yes. My non-vulgar rabbi. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Appreciate it as always. This has been the Messiah Hour here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com.